Wellington III adjusted his Italian silk tie as he stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board, each light representing another business he could acquire, another deal he could close. At 52, he had built an empire that spanned technology, real estate, and manufacturing. Forbes had listed him among the top 20 wealthiest individuals in America for the past 5 years running. But wealth couldn't fix everything. The sound of wheels against marble drew his attention. His son David maneuvered his custom wheelchair into the living room, the high-tech device moving with silent precision. At 19, David possessed his father's sharp intellect and determination, but a diving accident 2 years earlier had changed everything. What was supposed to be a simple college spring break trip to the Bahamas had ended with a broken neck and shattered dreams. "The new maid starts tomorrow," said without turning around. He had gone through 7 housekeepers in the past 18 months. Some had quit because they couldn't handle David's medical needs. Others had been dismissed for various ranging from theft to incompetence. David wheeled closer to the window. "I don't need a babysitter, Dad. The physical therapist comes 3 times a week, and I can manage most things myself now." Finally faced his son. David had inherited his mother's striking blue eyes and dark hair, but the accident had left him thin and pale. The young man who had once played varsity football and dreamed of joining the Marines now struggled with basic daily tasks that most people took for granted. "This isn't about babysitting. It's about having reliable help in the house. Someone who can assist with your medications, prepare proper meals, and maintain the household while I'm traveling." David's jaw tightened. "You mean someone to spy on me and report back about everything I do?" The accusation stung because it held more truth than cared to admit. Since the accident, he had become increasingly protective, some might say controlling. He had installed the most advanced medical monitoring equipment money could buy. David wore a discreet device that tracked his vital signs and could detect falls or medical emergencies. The penthouse had been retrofitted with cameras in every common area, ostensibly for security, but also to allow to check on his son remotely. "I worry about you," said simply. "Is that such a terrible thing for a father to do?" "Not worry, control. There's a difference." The conversation was interrupted by the building's concierge calling from the lobby, listened briefly before hanging up. "Mrs. is here for the interview." 20 minutes later, Maria sat across from them in the penthouse's formal dining room. She was younger than had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. Her resume was modest but solid. She had worked for several wealthy families in the past, providing both housekeeping services and medical assistance. "Tell me about your experience with disabled individuals," said, his tone businesslike. Maria's expression remained steady. "I spent 3 years caring for my grandmother after her stroke. She was paralyzed on her left side and needed help with everything from bathing to taking medications. Before that, I worked for the family in Connecticut. Their teenage son had muscular dystrophy." David shifted in his wheelchair. "What made you leave the family?" "Tommy passed away last spring. The family didn't need my services anymore." Her voice carried genuine sadness. "He was a wonderful young man, very brave." Notice the way David's expression softened slightly. His son had struggled to connect with previous housekeepers, most of whom had treated him like an invalid rather than a person. "The position pays well, but it's demanding," continued. "I travel frequently for business, sometimes for weeks at a time. You would be responsible for all household management, meal preparation, medication assistance, and being available for emergencies." "I understand, Mr. Wellington. There are cameras throughout the common areas for security purposes. You would have your own room and bathroom on the lower level, with access to the kitchen and laundry facilities at any time." Maria nodded. "That's acceptable. Do you have any questions about David's specific needs?" For the first time, Maria addressed David directly rather than speaking about him to his father. "What kind of help do you actually need? I'd rather hear it from you." David seemed surprised by the question. "I can transfer from my chair to my bed and shower independently. Sometimes I need help reaching things or opening jars. My hands work fine, but I don't have much grip strength. I take several medications throughout the day, and sometimes I forget the schedule." "What do you like to do for fun?" Another unexpected question. "I read a lot. I'm taking online college courses in computer programming. I used to play chess competitively before." He gestured vaguely at his wheelchair. I learned chess from my father. He was quite good. Perhaps we could play sometime if you'd like. Watched this exchange with interest. Previous housekeepers had focused entirely on medical requirements and household duties. None had shown personal interest in David as an individual. There is one more thing, said. David sometimes has what the doctors call episodes, anxiety attacks, depression. The adjustment to his new circumstances has been difficult. If you notice any concerning behavior, I need to know immediately. David's face flushed. Dad, you can't just tell every employee about my private medical information. It's relevant to the position, replied firmly. Maria needs to understand all aspects of the job. I've dealt with depression and anxiety in my previous work, Maria said gently. It's very common after traumatic injuries. The important thing is to maintain dignity and independence as much as possible while ensuring safety. After Maria left, David wheeled himself to his room without speaking to his father. Understood his son's anger, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible would happen if he wasn't constantly vigilant. The accident had taught him how quickly life could change, how precious and fragile everything he truly valued could be. He made his decision and called Maria's references. The family spoke glowingly of her competence and character. The other families echoed similar sentiments. By evening, he had made his choice. Maria started work the following Monday morning, showed her around the penthouse, explaining the security system, emergency procedures, and household routines. David remained largely in his room, emerging only for meals and his physical therapy sessions. He's not usually so withdrawn, explained as they stood in the kitchen. He's frustrated about needing help with anything. That's understandable. Independence is important to everyone, but especially to young people who had it and lost it suddenly. Pulled up the security camera app on his phone, showing her how the system worked. I can monitor these remotely when I'm traveling. If there's ever an emergency, the system automatically alerts both building security and emergency services. How does David feel about the cameras? The question caught off guard. What do you mean? It must be difficult to feel constantly watched, especially when you're already dealing with loss of control in other areas of your life. Frowned, the cameras are for safety and security. This building houses some very wealthy residents. We've had problems with theft and intrusion in the past. Of course, I was just wondering if he finds it stressful. That afternoon, left for a 3-day business trip to Chicago. He had delayed the trip twice already, reluctant to leave David with yet another new caregiver. But his presence was required for a major acquisition, and he couldn't postpone it again. From his hotel room that evening, he logged into the security system to check on things at home. The cameras showed Maria in the kitchen, preparing what looked like an elaborate dinner. David was in his room, visible through the open doorway as he worked at his computer. At dinner time, watched through the dining room camera as Maria served a meal that looked far more appealing than anything the previous housekeepers had prepared. David seemed more animated than he had been in weeks, actually engaging in conversation rather than eating in sullen silence. Over the next 2 days, found himself checking the cameras obsessively. He watched Maria helping David with his medications, always explaining what each pill was for and why he needed it. He saw her reading in the living room during her breaks, occasionally looking up to answer David's questions about homework. She seemed competent and professional in every interaction. But something nagged at him. There was an ease between them that seemed to develop unusually quickly. David was laughing more than he had since before the accident. When called each evening to check in, his son actually sounded cheerful. "How are things going with Maria?" he asked during his second night away. "She's fine, Dad. Actually helpful without being hovering. She taught me how to make this pasta dish tonight. Well, she did most of the work, but I helped with the seasoning." Felt a complex mix of relief and something he couldn't quite identify. Jealousy? Suspicion. His son was engaging with this woman in ways he hadn't with anyone since the accident, including his own father. When returned from Chicago, he found the penthouse spotless and David in notably better spirits. Maria had prepared a welcome home dinner that was both delicious and considerate of the dietary restrictions his doctor had recommended. "How did everything go?" he asked Maria privately while David was in his room. "Very well. David is remarkably independent for someone with his level of injury. He's also very intelligent and has a good sense of humor when he's not feeling frustrated or watched too closely. The comment about being watched struck as pointed, but he let it pass. Any concerns I should know about? None at all. He took all his medications on schedule, kept up with his physical therapy exercises, and completed his coursework. He seems to be doing much better emotionally as well. That night lay in bed reviewing the security footage from while he was away. Everything appeared normal, even exemplary. Maria performed her duties professionally and treated David with respect and kindness. She encouraged his independence while being available when he needed assistance. Yet couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening beneath the surface, something the cameras weren't capturing. David seemed happier and more engaged, which should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it made uneasy in ways he couldn't articulate. He had spent 2 years trying to protect his son from further harm, controlling every aspect of his environment and care. Now a relative stranger had accomplished in 3 days what had been unable to do in months. She had given David a reason to smile again. As he drifted off to sleep, made a mental note to pay closer attention to the security feeds in the coming days. Something about this situation felt too good to be true, and his business instincts had taught him to be suspicious of anything that seemed perfect on the surface. In the morning, he would begin watching more carefully, looking for cracks in Maria's competent facade. He had not built a billion-dollar empire by trusting people at face value, and he wouldn't start now when his son's was at stake. The cameras would tell him everything he needed to know. They always did. The first sign that something unusual was happening came 3 weeks after Maria started working for the Wellington family. Was reviewing security footage from the previous day when he noticed David's wheelchair positioned in the kitchen at an odd angle. The camera showed Maria moving around the kitchen island, occasionally disappearing from view behind David's chair, but their conversation was animated and punctuated by frequent laughter. Rewound the footage and watched more carefully. At one point, Maria seemed to be demonstrating something with her hands, making gestures that David mimicked from his seated position. When she moved behind his wheelchair, David's shoulders would straighten and his posture would improve noticeably. Curious switched to the living room camera for the same time period. The angle showed David transferring from his wheelchair to the couch with what appeared to be greater ease than usual. His movement seemed more confident, less hesitant. Maria stood nearby but didn't hover or offer unnecessary assistance. Over the following days, began studying the footage more systematically. He started keeping a notebook, documenting times when David appeared more mobile or animated than expected. The pattern was subtle but consistent. David was moving better, sitting, and engaging more actively with his environment. During his evening phone calls, David's mood remained notably improved. He talked about the online courses he was taking, mentioned books Maria had recommended, and even asked about business dealings with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "She's teaching me Spanish," David mentioned during one conversation. "Apparently I've been mispronouncing gracias my entire life." "Why Spanish?" asked. "She says it's good mental exercise, keeps the brain sharp, plus it's useful in business, right? You're always dealing with international clients." Found himself oddly touched that David was thinking about future business applications. Since the accident, his son had shown little interest in anything beyond his immediate daily survival. The next morning, decided to work from home instead of going to his downtown office. He told Maria it was to catch up on paperwork, but really he wanted to observe the household dynamics firsthand rather than through camera screens. What he witnessed challenged his preconceptions about his son's capabilities. During David's morning routine, Maria provided assistance only when specifically requested. She laid out his medications with clear explanations of what each one did, but allowed him to take them independently. When David struggled to reach something in a high cabinet, she brought him a lightweight reacher tool rather than simply getting the item for him. "Physical therapy exercises are at 10, she reminded him as she prepared breakfast. "I know," David replied, but without the irritation such reminders usually prompted. "Are you going to put me through those balance challenges again?" "Only if you're feeling up to it. We can stick to the basic routine if you prefer." Looked up sharply from his laptop. Balance challenges weren't part of David's prescribed physical therapy regimen. The official therapist who came 3 times a week focused on maintaining muscle tone and preventing complications from prolonged sitting. "What kind of balance challenges?" asked casually. David and Maria exchanged a look that couldn't quite interpret. Just some exercises Maria learned when she was caring for her grandmother, nothing dramatic. After breakfast, positioned himself in his study where he could observe the living room through the doorway. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Maria had moved the coffee table to create an open space near David's wheelchair. She placed several cushions on the floor and helped David transfer from his chair to sit on the edge of the couch. Then, with her hands positioned protectively but not supporting him, she encouraged him to lean forward, backward, and side to side. "Feel your core muscles engaging," she said softly. "Don't think about your legs, focus on your center of gravity." David's face was tight with concentration, but he was following her instructions. Watched in amazement as his son maintained his balance through movements that should have been impossible given his injury. "Now try reaching for that cushion," Maria instructed, pointing to one about 2 feet away. David stretched forward, wobbled slightly, but managed to grab the cushion and return to an upright position. The smile that crossed his face was the had seen since before the accident. "Excellent, you're getting stronger every day." "Do you think," David started, then stopped himself. "What?" "Nothing, it's stupid." "Try me." David was quiet for a moment. "Do you think I might be able to do more than the doctors said? I mean, they were pretty definitive about the paralysis being permanent." Maria helped him transfer back to his wheelchair before answering. "Every injury is different. Every person heals differently. The most important thing is not to give up on yourself." "But the specialist said." "Specialists know a lot about medicine, but they don't know everything about you specifically. Your determination, your willingness to work, your mental strength, those things matter too." Felt his chest tighten. Hope was dangerous. He had spent 2 years helping David accept his limitations, adjust to his new reality, find ways to build a meaningful life within the constraints of his disability. The idea of false hope leading to crushing disappointment terrified him. That afternoon, while David was taking an online calculus exam, confronted Maria in the kitchen. "I saw what you were doing this morning," he said without preamble. Maria continued chopping vegetables for dinner. "Which part?" "The balance exercises. That's not part of his prescribed therapy regimen." "No, it's not." "Then why are you doing it?" She set down her knife and faced him directly. "Because he asked me to help him try. Because I've seen people with similar injuries make unexpected progress when they're motivated and consistent with their efforts. His doctors have been very clear about the extent of his paralysis. Giving him false hope is cruel." "Is it false hope if he's actually improving?" Stared at her. "What do you mean, improving?" "Haven't you noticed? His posture is better. His balance is better. He's transferring more confidently. He even took a few steps yesterday with the parallel bars." "What parallel bars?" Maria looked surprised. "The ones in his room, I thought you knew about them." Felt the blood drain from his face. There were no parallel bars in David's room. At least there hadn't been when he left for work that morning. He hurried to David's room and stopped short in the doorway. Against one wall stood a set of adjustable parallel bars, the kind used in physical therapy clinics. David looked up from his computer with an expression that mixed defiance with apprehension. "Where did these come from?" demanded. "I bought them online. They were delivered yesterday." "Why?" "Because I wanted to try. Because Maria thinks I might be able to walk again, at least a little bit." "David, we've discussed this. The nerve damage to your spinal cord is extensive. Multiple specialists have confirmed that the paralysis is complete and permanent." "What if they're wrong?" "They're not wrong. These are leading experts in spinal cord injury. I consulted with the best doctors money can buy." David's jaw set in a familiar expression of Wellington stubbornness. "So I'm not allowed to try? I'm not allowed to work toward getting better?" "I don't want you to get hurt again. Not physically, but emotionally. When you realize that this isn't going to work." "When I realize, or when you decide for me?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Felt the familiar surge of protective frustration that had defined their relationship since the accident. Every decision he had made was intended to shield David from further pain and disappointment. "Show me," said finally. "What?" Show me what you've been doing. I want to see for myself. David transferred to his wheelchair and positioned it next to the parallel bars. With Maria's assistance, he stood and gripped the bars with both hands. His legs were unsteady and his knees buckled slightly, but he was bearing some of his own weight. "Now watch," Maria said softly. David took a step forward with his right foot, then shifted his weight and brought his left foot to meet it. The movement was slow and labored, but it was unmistakably a step. Then another. He managed 4 steps before his strength gave out and Maria helped him sit back down. Stood frozen, unable to process what he had just witnessed. According to every medical professional he had consulted, what he had just seen was impossible. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked hoarsely. "About 2 weeks," David replied. "At first I could barely stand for 10 seconds. Now I can walk maybe 20 feet if I take breaks." "Why didn't you tell me?" Father and son looked at each other across a gulf that seemed to have opened suddenly between them. David's expression was hurt and frustrated. "Because I knew you'd try to stop me. Because you've decided that I'm helpless and need to be protected from everything, including my own hope." "That's not fair." "Isn't it? When was the last time you asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what was best for me?" Felt the ground shifting beneath him. For 2 years, he had structured every aspect of David's life around medical necessities and safety precautions. He had made decisions based on expert opinions and worst-case scenarios. The idea that he might have been limiting his son's potential recovery had never occurred to him. That evening called Dr. Harrison, the neurologist who had overseen David's initial treatment and ongoing care. He described what he had witnessed, trying to keep the emotion out of his voice. "It's not uncommon for patients to experience some return of sensation or movement months or even years after the initial injury," Dr. Harrison explained. "The nervous system is complex, and healing doesn't always follow predictable patterns." "But you said the paralysis was permanent." "Based on the initial scans and David's presentation at the time, yes. But complete spinal cord injuries are actually less common than partial injuries that present as complete initially." "Are you saying David might actually be able to walk again?" "I'm saying it's worth. Can you bring him in for new imaging and some tests? I'd like to see exactly what kind of recovery we're dealing with." Hung up the phone and sat in his study for a long time, staring out at the city lights. He thought about all the conversations where he had urged David to focus on adaptation rather than recovery. All the times he had dismissed his son's questions about experimental treatments or alternative therapies. He had meant to protect David from disappointment, but perhaps he had been protecting himself from hope instead. The security cameras continued their silent vigil throughout the penthouse, recording every moment of daily life, but was beginning to understand that the most important developments in his son's recovery were happening in the spaces between observation, in the quiet moments of encouragement and determination that no camera could truly capture. Tomorrow, he would schedule an appointment with Dr. Harrison. Tonight, he would have the conversation with David that night was one of the most difficult of life. They sat in the living room, father and son, separated by more than just the space between the couch and wheelchair. The weight of 2 years of misunderstandings and good intentions gone wrong filled the silence between them. "I need to understand something," began carefully. "When did you first notice that you were regaining sensation in your legs?" David shifted in his wheelchair, his expression guarded. "About 6 months ago. It was just tingling at first, like when your foot falls asleep. I mentioned it to Dr. Harrison during one of my checkups." "What did he say?" "That it was probably phantom sensations. He said it was common and didn't necessarily mean anything was changing with the actual paralysis." Felt a stab of guilt. He remembered that appointment. He had been on a conference call during the examination and had only caught the end of the conversation. Dr. Harrison had mentioned something about phantom sensations and had nodded along, trusting the expert opinion without questioning further. "Why didn't you tell me about it?" David's laugh was bitter. "Because every time I tried to talk about feeling better or wanting to try something new, you would remind me about accepting my limitations. You made it pretty clear that hopping for recovery was naive and potentially harmful." The words hit like physical blows. He had said those things, believing he was helping David develop realistic expectations and emotional resilience. But his son had heard them as dismissal and discouragement. I was trying to protect you from disappointment. I know, but Dad, I'm 19 years old. I get to decide what risks are worth taking with my own body and my own hope. When did Maria start helping you with the exercises? About 2 weeks after she started working here. I told her about the sensations I was feeling, and she asked if I had tried any exercises beyond the basic physical therapy routine. Thought back to his background check on Maria. Her resume had been solid but unremarkable. He certainly hadn't expected her to become an advocate for experimental recovery techniques. What kind of training does she have? Is she qualified to be designing therapy programs? She's not designing anything. She's just helping me try things that I want to try. When her grandmother had her stroke, Maria worked with her physical therapist to learn proper techniques. She's also done a lot of research online about spinal cord injury recovery. Research online isn't the same as medical training. No, it's not. But it's more than what I was getting from sitting in my chair all day, being afraid to hope for anything better. The accusation stung because it was accurate, had created an environment where hope was discouraged in favor of acceptance. He had meant well, but the result was that his son had stopped believing in the possibility of improvement. I called Dr. Harrison tonight. He wants to see you for new tests and imaging. Apparently, some return of function after spinal cord injury is more common than I was led to believe initially. David's face lit up with cautious optimism. Really, he said that? He said every case is different, and that healing doesn't always follow predictable timelines. He wants to see exactly what kind of recovery you're experiencing. For the first time in months, David smiled at his father with something approaching their old closeness. Thank you for calling him, and for being willing to consider that maybe the original prognosis wasn't the final word. Felt the knot of tension in his chest begin to loosen slightly. I've made some mistakes, David. I let my fear override my judgment. I thought I was protecting you, but I was really protecting myself from having to face the possibility of losing hope again. You didn't lose me in the accident, Dad. I'm still here. Different than before, maybe, but still your son. I know, but watching you struggle, seeing you in pain, not being able to fix it, I felt so helpless. Controlling everything I could control seemed like the only way to prevent more bad things from happening. David was quiet for a moment, absorbing this admission. The cameras don't help, you know. It feels like being watched constantly, like you don't trust me to manage my own life. Had known this conversation about surveillance was inevitable. The cameras are for security and emergency monitoring, if something happened while I was away. Something like what? Like me falling, like me having a medical emergency. The monitoring system in my chair already tracks that stuff. The cameras are about you needing to see everything that happens here. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I have been overly cautious about monitoring the household. It's not just cautious, Dad. It's invasive. Maria is a professional caregiver doing her job, but having her every move recorded makes it seem like you don't trust her judgment either. The mention of Maria brought attention back to his original concerns about the new maid. But those concerns were evolving as he began to understand the positive impact she had been having on David's recovery. Tell me more about how Maria has been helping you, he said. David's demeanor changed noticeably when discussing Maria. His voice became more animated and his posture straightened. She doesn't treat me like I'm broken. When I mentioned the sensations in my legs, she didn't dismiss them or tell me not to get my hopes up. She asked what I wanted to try and then helped me figure out how to do it safely. What else has she been teaching you besides the walking exercises? Breathing techniques to help with anxiety, cooking skills that I can do from my chair. She's been helping me with my Spanish, which is actually harder than my programming courses. And she plays chess, so we've been having games in the evenings. Realized that he knew very little about how David spent his time beyond the structured activities like physical therapy and online classes. The cameras showed him basic activities, but they couldn't capture the quality of interactions or the gradual building of trust and friendship. She sounds like she's been good for you. She has been. She makes me feel like a person instead of a patient. When I'm around her, I forget sometimes that I'm supposed to be limited. That phrase, supposed to be limited, crystallized something for. He had inadvertently created an environment where David's disability defined him completely, where any attempt to push beyond those limitations was discouraged. I want you to schedule an appointment with Dr. Harrison for this week. I want to understand exactly what kind of recovery might be possible. And the exercises with Maria, can I keep doing those while we wait for the appointment? Hesitated. His instinct was to insist on medical supervision for any therapy beyond the prescribed routine. But David was an adult, and the exercises seemed to be helping rather than causing harm. Yes, but I want to understand better what you're doing. Would you be willing to show me the full routine tomorrow? You want to watch? I want to learn. If this is helping you recover, then I should understand it instead of being afraid of it. The next morning, canceled his first 3 meetings to observe David's exercise session. Maria had transformed the living room into an impromptu therapy clinic, with yoga mats on the floor and the parallel bars positioned for optimal safety. We always start with breathing and meditation, Maria explained, as she guided David through a series of deep breathing exercises designed to reduce muscle tension and improve focus. Watched as his son's entire body relaxed, the chronic tightness in his shoulders and neck visibly decreasing. This was followed by gentle stretching exercises that Maria performed on David's legs while he lay on the mat. I can feel that, David said as Maria worked on his left calf muscle. It's not sharp feeling like before the accident, but it's definitely sensation. Good, that's progress from last week. The standing and walking exercises came next, and observed them with new understanding. Maria spotted David carefully, but allowed him to bear as much weight as he could manage. Her encouragement was realistic but optimistic, focusing on small improvements rather than dramatic breakthroughs. Yesterday you managed 6 steps before needing to rest, she noted. Today let's see if you can do 6 steps, rest, then 6 more. David accomplished the goal with obvious effort but also obvious pride. When he sat back down in his wheelchair, his face was flushed with exertion and satisfaction. How do you feel? Asked. Tired, but good tired. Like I actually accomplished something instead of just enduring another day. That afternoon, found himself watching the security camera footage with different eyes. Instead of looking for problems or causes for concern, he observed the genuine partnership that had developed between David and Maria. Their interactions were professional but warm, characterized by mutual respect and shared goals. In one sequence, he watched Maria teaching David to prepare a complex dinner while seated. She had rearranged the kitchen workspace to make everything accessible, but she allowed David to do all the actual cooking. When he dropped a utensil and couldn't reach it easily, she retrieved it without comment or fuss. In another clip, he observed them playing chess in the evening. David was clearly winning, and Maria was equally clearly enjoying being outmaneuvered. Their conversation ranged from chess strategy to David's computer programming projects to Maria's family in El Salvador. For the first time, realized that his son had formed a genuine friendship, something that had been absent from his life since the accident. David's old friends had gradually drifted away, unable to navigate the changed dynamics of their relationship with someone who was now disabled. Maria treated David exactly like herself, as a person with strengths and limitations, goals and interests, capable of both giving and receiving support. The appointment with Dr. Harrison was scheduled for Friday morning. Decided to accompany David, both for moral support and to get a complete medical perspective on his son's progress. Dr. Harrison was surprised by the improvements in David's mobility and sensation. New MRI scans revealed that while the spinal cord injury remained severe, there was less damage than the original scans had suggested. Some nerve pathways that had appeared completely severed were actually intact but severely compressed. It's possible that as swelling reduced and David's overall health improved, some function returned gradually, Dr. Harrison explained. This kind of delayed recovery is uncommon but not unheard of. What's the prognosis going forward? Asked. Hard to say definitively. David may continue to improve with consistent therapy and exercise. He may plateau at his current level, or he might regress if he pushes too hard too fast. What about the exercises he's been doing with his caregiver? From what David has described, they sound appropriate and beneficial. I'd like to meet with this Maria to understand her methods better, but anything that's helping David regain strength and mobility within his tolerance is positive. Driving home from the appointment, felt a cautious optimism that he hadn't experienced since before the accident. David's prognosis wasn't certain, but it was more hopeful than anyone had dared to suggest previously. "I owe Maria an apology," said as they stopped at a red light. "For what?" "For being suspicious of her methods instead of being grateful for her results. For treating her like just another employee instead of recognizing that she's been giving you something I couldn't hope combined with practical action. She's been really good for me, Dad. Not just the physical stuff, but helping me remember that I'm still myself." That evening approached Maria in the kitchen where she was preparing dinner. The Maria paused in her dinner preparations, setting down the wooden spoon she had been using to stir the sauce. She turned to face with the same calm, direct manner she had shown from their first interview. "What kind of apology?" she asked simply. "I've been watching you through the security cameras, looking for reasons to be concerned about your methods and your influence on David. I was wrong to be suspicious when I should have been grateful." Maria nodded slowly. "I wondered if that was the case. David mentioned that you seemed tense whenever he talked about the progress he was making. I've spent 2 years trying to protect him from disappointment. When he started improving under your care, my first instinct was to assume something was too good to be true. And now I realize that you've given him something I couldn't, the belief that his future isn't limited by his current circumstances." Maria resumed stirring the sauce, considering his words. "David is a remarkable young man. He has intelligence, determination, and courage. Those qualities didn't disappear because of his accident. But I treated him as if they had." "You treated him like someone who needed to be protected. That comes from love, even if the result wasn't what you intended." Felt a wave of relief that she understood his motivations, even while recognizing their negative impact. "Dr. Harrison wants to meet with you to discuss David's exercise routine. He's impressed with the progress and wants to understand your methods." "I'd be happy to speak with him. I want David to have the best possible medical support for his recovery." "There's something else. I've decided to modify the security camera system. David was right that the constant surveillance was invasive and counterproductive." Maria looked genuinely surprised. "That's a significant change for you." "I've been controlling everything I could control because I felt so helpless after the accident. But I've learned that trying to control every aspect of David's life was actually limiting his recovery." "What will you do differently?" "The cameras will remain active in common areas for legitimate security purposes, but I'm going to stop using them to monitor daily activities. David deserves privacy and the freedom to make his own choices about his care and recovery." That weekend, implemented the changes he had promised. He adjusted the camera system to record only during certain hours and in specific areas, removing the constant monitoring that had characterized the past 2 years. He also had a frank conversation with building security about respecting David's independence while maintaining appropriate emergency protocols. The changes in household dynamics were immediate and noticeable. David seemed more relaxed and began spending more time in common areas rather than retreating to his room. His conversations with both and Maria became more open and animated. "I want to show you something," David said on Sunday morning, wheeling his chair to the parallel bars in his room. And Maria watched as David demonstrated his progress over the past month. He was now able to stand for several minutes without fatigue, walk nearly 50 feet with rest breaks, and even climb 2 steps using a handrail for support. The improvement was gradual but undeniable. "This is incredible," said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea you had progressed this much. I wanted to be sure it was real before I got anyone's hopes up too much, including my own." "How does it feel, physically, I mean?" "Different than before the accident, but stronger every day. My legs feel heavy and unsteady sometimes, but they're definitely working better than the doctors thought they would." Maria had been quiet during this demonstration, but noticed the pride in her expression as she watched David's confident movements. "What's the next goal?" asked. "Walking unassisted for short distances, maybe eventually climbing stairs without handrails. Dr. Harrison said we need to be patient and not push too hard, but he thinks continued improvement is possible." That afternoon made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his executive assistant and cleared his calendar for the following week. Is everything all right, Mr. Wellington? His assistant asked, concerned by the unusual request. Everything is better than it's been in years. I'm taking some personal time to focus on family. For the next several days, worked from home and participated actively in David's daily routine. He observed the physical therapy sessions, learned about the nutritional planning Maria had implemented to support David's recovery, and even participated in some of the exercises himself. You're more out of shape than your son, Maria teased as struggled through a core strengthening routine. Apparently spending 12 hours a day in boardrooms and office chairs isn't optimal physical preparation, replied, breathing hard. David laughed at his father's exertion. Maybe you need a personal trainer too. Maybe I do. The week together revealed to how much he had missed of David's personality and interests during the past 2 years of medical focus and protective oversight. David's sense of humor was sharp and sophisticated. His analysis of current events and business trends was insightful and original. His computer programming skills had advanced to a near-professional level. Have you thought about what you want to do when you're ready to return to college? Asked one evening as they played chess. David was winning decisively, as had become his pattern. I've been thinking about changing my major to biomedical engineering, maybe focusing on assistive technology development. That's a significant change from business administration. The accident changed my perspective on a lot of things. I want to work on problems that matter to people who are dealing with disabilities and injuries. Studied his son's face, seeing a maturity and sense of purpose that hadn't been there before the accident. That sounds like meaningful work. Plus, if I'm going to be dealing with this stuff for the rest of my life, I might as well become an expert in it. Do you think you'll be dealing with it for the rest of your life? David considered the question seriously. Some version of it, probably. I don't think I'll ever be exactly like I was before, but I'm not the same person I was before anyway. None of us are the same as we were 2 years ago. Realized this was true. The accident had changed all of them, not just David. Himself had become more controlling and fearful. But perhaps with David's recovery and this new understanding between them, they could all continue to evolve in healthier directions. I have a proposal, said, moving his chess piece into what he hoped was a less vulnerable position. What kind of proposal? I'd like to establish a research foundation focused on spinal cord injury recovery and assistive technology development. You could be involved in designing the research priorities and grant-making decisions. David looked up from the chess board, his eyes wide. Are you serious? Completely serious. You have insights into these issues that I never could have without experiencing them personally. And if you're going to study biomedical engineering, practical experience with research funding and development would be valuable. That would be amazing. There's so much promising research happening, but funding is always limited. Money isn't limited. Vision and commitment are what's usually lacking. They finished their chess game, David won, as expected, and spent the evening discussing possibilities for the research foundation. Was struck by his son's sophisticated understanding of current research and his thoughtful approach to identifying the most promising areas for investment. Maria should be involved in this too, David said as they were wrapping up their conversation. In what capacity? She has practical experience with different types of injuries and recovery processes, and she understands the daily realities that patients and families deal with. Research that doesn't consider the real-world application isn't much use to anyone. Agreed, though he realized he still knew relatively little about Maria's background and qualifications beyond her excellent work with David. Tell me more about Maria's experience. I know about her grandmother and the family, but what else? She worked at a rehabilitation hospital in El Salvador before coming to the United States. She's actually a trained physical therapist, but her credentials don't transfer directly to the U.S. system. This information surprised. Maria's resume hadn't mentioned formal medical training, and she had never claimed qualifications beyond her caregiving experience. Why didn't she mention her physical therapy background when I hired her? She said American employers often don't value foreign credentials, and sometimes they get suspicious if you seem overqualified for a housekeeping position. Felt another stab of guilt. He had indeed been focused primarily on finding reliable household help rather than recognizing the professional expertise Maria brought to David's care. Does she want to pursue physical therapy certification here? She's been studying for the certification exams, but it's expensive and time-consuming. She needs to keep working while she studies. What if the foundation covered her education and certification costs in exchange for her involvement in the research projects? David's face lit up. You do that? Good people with relevant expertise and demonstrated commitment are exactly what we need. If Maria is interested, we should definitely explore that possibility. The next morning approached Maria with the proposal. She listened carefully as he explained the research foundation concept and the potential role she could play. "This is very generous," she said when he finished. "But I need you to understand I didn't help David expecting anything beyond fair payment for honest work. I know that. This isn't payment for services already rendered. It's an investment in expanding the impact of the expertise you've demonstrated with David. Let me think about it. This kind of opportunity, I never imagined it would be possible. Take as much time as you need to decide." That afternoon was in his study working on preliminary plans for the research foundation when David appeared in the doorway. He was standing, supporting himself with forearm crutches that didn't recognize. "Where did those come from?" asked, rising from his desk. "Maria ordered them last week. They're supposed to help with longer distance walking while I build up strength and balance." David demonstrated by walking slowly but steadily from the doorway to his desk, a distance of about 15 feet. His movements were careful but confident. "This is incredible," said, watching his son navigate independently. "How does it feel?" "Like freedom," David replied simply. Watching his son stand beside his desk, realized that the past 2 years of focus on limitations and safety had obscured the possibility of recovery and growth. David was not the same person he had been before the accident, but he was becoming someone new and remarkable in his own right. "I'm proud of you," said, "not just for the physical progress, but for your determination to keep pushing forward when everyone else was telling you to accept limitations. I couldn't have done it without Maria's support, and I couldn't keep doing it without knowing that you believe in the possibility too. I do believe, and I want to do everything I can to support your continued recovery and help other people in similar situations." As David made his way back to the living room, moving with increasing confidence on his crutch 6 months later, stood at the same floor-to-ceiling windows where the story had begun, but everything had changed. The Manhattan skyline remained the same sprawling circuit board of lights, but his perspective on control, success, and family had been fundamentally altered. Behind him, he could hear David and Maria discussing research proposals for the Wellington Foundation for spinal recovery research. David was standing at the dining room table, using it for support as he reviewed grant applications from universities across the country. The sight of his son standing and working normally had become routine, but never tired of witnessing it. "The John's proposal is interesting," David was saying. "They're working on nerve regeneration techniques that could help people with much more severe injuries than mine." "What kind of timeline are they projecting?" Maria asked. She was now the Foundation's Director of Patient Advocacy, a role that combined her clinical expertise with her understanding of the real-world challenges facing spinal cord injury patients and their families. 5 to 7 years for initial human trials, but the preliminary results in animal models are encouraging. Turned from the window to join their conversation. The Foundation had become operational 3 months earlier, with an initial funding commitment of $50 million. David served as a research advisor while completing his biomedical engineering degree through an accelerated program that combined online coursework with hands-on research experience. "How many proposals are we reviewing this quarter?" asked. 12 for basic research grants, 6 for assistive technology development, and 3 for patient support programs, Maria replied, consulting her tablet. "The review committee is meeting next week to make recommendations." The Foundation had quickly gained recognition in the spinal cord injury research community. The combination of significant funding, patient-centered priorities, and David's personal expertise had attracted applications from leading institutions worldwide. "There's something else we should discuss," David said, setting down the proposal he was reviewing. "I've been accepted into the doctoral program at MIT. They want me to work on neural interface technology for paralyzed patients. Felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. David had made remarkable physical progress, but graduate school would be demanding both intellectually and physically. How do you feel about taking on that level of academic commitment? Ready, more than ready. My physical recovery has plateaued somewhat, but my intellectual recovery is just getting started. David now walked independently for moderate distances and used a wheelchair only for longer outings or when he was fatigued. His improvement had exceeded everyone's expectations, including his own. But more importantly, he had developed a sense of purpose and confidence that transcended his physical capabilities. The neural interface research is fascinating, Maria added. If successful, it could help people with complete spinal cord injuries regain motor function through computer-assisted muscle stimulation. When would you start? Asked. Fall semester. I'll finish my undergraduate degree this spring and have the summer to transition. Realized that David's return to full-time academic life would mean significant changes in their household routine. David would need less day-to-day assistance, and Maria's role would necessarily evolve. Have you thought about what this means for Maria's position here? David and Maria exchanged a look that had learned to recognize. They had clearly discussed this development extensively. Actually, we have a proposal about that too, David said. The foundation needs a full-time research coordination office, Maria explained. Somewhere that grant recipients can access resources, get technical assistance, and coordinate with patient advocacy groups. Are you suggesting we establish a physical office for the foundation? More than that, David said. I'm suggesting we create a comprehensive spinal cord injury research and rehabilitation center, somewhere that combines cutting-edge research with practical patient services. Was intrigued but cautious. Expanding the foundation's mission to include direct patient care would require significantly more resources and expertise. What kind of facility are you envisioning? Outpatient rehabilitation services, research laboratories, technology development workshops, and patient family support programs all in one location, Maria said. A place where people can access everything from physical therapy to experimental treatments to peer support groups. And where new assistive technologies can be tested and refined by the people who will actually use them, David added. This is a much larger undertaking than grant-making, pointed out. Yes, it is, but it's also a much larger opportunity to make a real difference. Walked back to the window, thinking about the scope of what they were proposing. Creating a comprehensive research and rehabilitation center would require tens of millions of dollars in startup costs and ongoing operational funding. It would also require him to take on a level of public visibility that he had previously avoided. Where would we locate such a facility? There's a property in White Plains that used to be a corporate training center, David said. The building is designed for accessibility, has space for laboratories and clinical facilities, and includes residential accommodations for patients who need intensive therapy. You've already been looking at real estate. We've been thinking about this for months, Maria admitted. But we wanted to wait until David's academic plans were settled before presenting the idea formally. Appreciated their thoroughness, but he was also struck by how naturally they had begun planning major initiatives without his direct involvement. David was developing independence and leadership skills that extended far beyond his physical recovery. What kind of timeline would we be looking at? 18 months to acquire and renovate the facility, hire staff, and obtain necessary licensing and certifications, Maria replied. David could be involved in the planning and development while he's finishing his D coursework. And after that? After that, we'd have a facility that could serve as a model for how spinal cord injury research and patient care should be integrated, David said. Instead of having people travel between different institutions for different services, everything would be coordinated and collaborative. Found himself genuinely excited by the vision they were presenting. It was ambitious and expensive, but it was also exactly the kind of project that could have transformative impact beyond any single research grant or technology development. I want to see a detailed business plan and budget projections, he said finally. Already done, David replied, handing him a thick folder. Financial projections, staffing requirements, regulatory compliance issues, and comparative analysis of similar facilities. Open the folder and scan the executive summary. The level of detail and sophistication was impressive, clearly representing months of careful research and planning. When did you have time to put this together? Evenings and weekends for the past 4 months. Maria did most of the regulatory research, and I focused on the technology and research components. This is professional-level work. We're not the same people we were 2 years ago, David said. The accident changed our priorities, but it also gave us knowledge and perspective that we didn't have before. That evening reviewed the complete proposal for the rehabilitation center. The financial projections were realistic, the operational plans were thorough, and the potential impact was significant. But beyond the practical details, he was struck by the vision of hope and possibility that infused every aspect of the proposal. 2 years earlier, his focus had been on protecting David from further disappointment and helping him adapt to permanent limitations. Now David was planning to create a facility that would help hundreds of other people push beyond their own perceived limitations. The transformation wasn't just in David's physical capabilities, though those improvements had been remarkable. The real change was in his sense of agency and purpose. David had evolved from someone who saw himself as disabled by circumstances beyond his control to someone who understood that circumstances could be changed through determination, resources, and collaborative effort. Maria's role in this transformation had been crucial, but it had also evolved in ways couldn't have predicted. She had started as a caregiver and had become a partner in David's recovery and a catalyst for his broader ambitions. Her combination of clinical expertise, practical wisdom, and genuine care had created possibilities that wealth and connections alone never could have achieved. The next morning called an emergency board meeting for the Wellington Foundation. The board consisted of David, Maria, Dr. Harrison, and 2 prominent spinal cord injury researchers. He presented David and Maria's proposal for the Comprehensive Research and Rehabilitation Center, along with his recommendation for full funding and development. "This is a significant expansion of our mission," Dr. Harrison observed after reviewing the proposal. "It's a natural evolution of our mission," David countered. "Research without practical application and patient services without research integration both limit the potential impact we can have." "The financial commitment is substantial," noted Dr., one of the research advisors. "The potential return, both social and financial, justifies the investment," replied. "This facility could become a model that's replicated nationally." "What about operational oversight?" asked Dr., the other research advisor. "Managing a complex facility requires different skills than grant-making." "Maria would serve as executive director, with responsibility for day-to-day operations and patient services coordination," David explained. "I would oversee research integration and technology development, would maintain overall strategic direction and financial oversight." The board voted unanimously to approve the project, with implementation beginning immediately. Authorized the purchase of the White Plains property and the hiring of an architectural firm to begin renovation planning. 6 months later, construction was on what would become the Wellington Center for Spinal Recovery Research and Rehabilitation. David had started his doctoral program at MIT, but spent 2 days each week in New York working on the center's development. Maria had enrolled in an accelerated program to complete her U.S. physical therapy certification while overseeing the clinical program design. Found himself busier and more energized than he had been in years. The center project required him to engage with medical professionals, researchers, patients, and community leaders in ways that were more personally meaningful than his traditional business dealings. "You seem different," David observed one evening as they reviewed architectural plans for the research laboratories. "Different how?" "More engaged, more optimistic, like you're building something that matters to you personally instead of just professionally." Considered this observation. "I think I spent so many years focused on accumulating wealth and power that I forgot why those things were supposed to be important. This project feels like using resources for their intended purpose." "Which is?" "Making life better for people, solving problems that actually matter, leaving something behind that will continue to have positive impact long after I'm gone." David smiled at his father's reflection. You know, if someone had told me 2 years ago that my accident would eventually lead to you becoming a philanthropist and me becoming a researcher, I would have thought they were crazy. The accident was still a terrible thing that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Of course, but the response to the accident, the recovery, the growth that came out of it, that's been extraordinary. Nodded, thinking about the journey they had traveled together. The accident had indeed been devastating, but their response to it had revealed strength and possibility that none of them had known existed. Maria deserves most of the credit for that growth, he said. Maria deserves credit for believing in possibilities when the rest of us had given up on them. But the actual growth came from all of us being willing to challenge our assumptions about what was possible. As they worked late into the evening on plans for the center, reflected on the security cameras that still monitored the common areas of their penthouse. The cameras had once represented his need to control and protect. Now they simply recorded the daily activities of a household focused on growth, recovery, and contribution to something larger than themselves. The footage would show David walking confidently through the apartment, Maria coordinating research initiatives while completing her certification requirements, and himself working on projects that combined his business expertise with genuine passion for their mission. Most importantly, the cameras would record a family that had learned to build hope and possibility out of tragedy and limitation. They had discovered that the most important kind of wealth wasn't financial assets or business empires, but the capacity to transform challenges into opportunities and to use their resources in service of helping others do the same. The Wellington Center would open in 18 months, ready to serve patients and families facing the same challenges that had once seemed insurmountable. And in the security footage of their daily lives, future observers would see the evidence of what was possible when protection gave way to empowerment, when control gave way to collaboration, and when fear gave way to hope guided by practical actiones, returned to his work on the foundation plans with renewed energy and purpose. The security cameras continued their vigil, but now they were documenting progress and hope rather than monitoring for problems and setbacks. Cameras would record this conversation. But for once, that felt appropriate rather than intrusive. I owe you a significant apology. He began difficult conversation with his son about trust, hope, and the difference between protection and control. Showered and dressed for another day of managing his empire, unaware that his carefully constructed surveillance system was about to reveal truths that would challenge everything he thought he knew about trust, control, and what his son actually needed to heal.